Hello and welcome to another episode of Bharatvaarta Weekly. Today, unfortunately, Roshan Karyappa, your regular host, is traveling and away. So it's just with me. I have our regular guest Abhishek Paul, and we'll be talking about the news and events this week. It was quite an interesting week with Modi meeting Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, Roger Federer retiring, and cheetahs are being introduced in the Kuno Wildlife Park, the national park in Madhya Pradesh. So, moving on. Last week we had an episode of the state of work episode post COVID. We spoke with K. Sudarshan and Abhishek Asthana, and they are talking about like the changes in remote work and how this is going to change the work situation. So, Abhishek, did you catch the episode?
Yeah, Nirav. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did
So,
catch.
uh, what do you think about it, or what kind of stood out for you?
So I really enjoyed listening to this episode. I think both Sudarshan and Abhishek, gave very balanced and practical viewpoints in terms of the various topics discussed, right? Like, for example, there was an extensive discussion on work from office versus work from home, and they touched upon various factors, right? How for different people in different stages of their life, in different circumstances in their personal life, may want to choose one or the other option, right? There's never one particular uh, one size fits all that works for every person or every org, right? So, for example, one of the good examples given was like how, for example, if you are in a traditional kind of uh, work where let's say you are an ad agency, or you are in some kind of a normal tech work from home might work. But if you are in the early stages of a product company, the collaboration face to face is probably much more important, and then work from office becomes much more vital, right? So that was one of the topics discussed. Then they also talked about in general about how the job market is doing, the peaks and troughs that we have seen in terms of hiring, uh, in the post-COVID environment and so on. So yeah, I think they covered a lot of relevant topics in a very practical and factual way. So I would definitely recommend our viewers to check it out.
Absolutely. And so first, uh, we had the former finance minister P. Chidambaram making comments on the current finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman. So the our finance minister Sitharaman actually mentioned that the post 1991 reforms were a bit half baked, and retaliating to that, Chidambaram mentioned that. One, that at least they did not deliver any sort of overcooked reforms. So spoke about things like demonetization and multiple rate GST, etc. And second, he kind of like made a wry remark about minister had taken bakery and cooking courses in university. So I think this has been quite, maybe you can say this is a gender insensitive comment. Probably would not have made it about like another male finance minister, but here, I think this is kind of, if you're in the opposition opposing anything, we all know that reforms, whatever they were done, it's like you could say is a phrase which was used half baked, but you could say that reforms affected only like a certain part of the society. Maybe it was just one step in a long journey, right? So you can, it's the way you put it. Obviously, the current ruling party will want to take away credit from the previous ruling party, etc. So politicians are going to trade barbs. But here, I think this was a bit insensitive. I don't know, Abhishek. Like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, generally you would think that someone as educated as Mr. Chidambaram would, not make these kind of statements which definitely come across as sexist in nature, right? And while he may have been trying to do a pun on baking and all that, uh, but still it's kind of something which is, I would say it's pretty unfortunate. Like, it sort of reveals your subconscious bias, right? Or your sense of superiority that you have. Uh, and I think if the Congress party were to truly look at it, they have definitely not, uh, I would say, taken, or let's say, how do I say, they have not really looked at the 1991-92 reforms and taken the maximum benefit out of it, I would say, because perhaps there is some sort of resentment, or I don't know, against Mr. Narasimha Rao, and they want to keep that part sort of understated. And so, the they their story typically emphasizes the role of Mr. Manmohan Singh much more than Narasimha Rao when it comes to their recounting and taking credit of the reforms then. And I think that's fine. As a party, you can definitely defend your record as far as the 1991 reforms go, but yeah, he could have definitely done it in a much more better way.
Yeah, absolutely. And reforms is like a long journey. I think we had some sort of early reforms in the in early 80s when Maruti and Hero Honda was set up, and then 1991 reforms were actually forced upon India due to a crisis, right? There are a lot of people involved. There was like the RBI governor, IG Patel. There's like Manmohan Singh, the finance minister, PV Narasimha Rao, the prime minister there. And this is just like now I'm trying to be punny here, but like Chidambaram is trying to score brownie points. I don't know if they are half baked or overcooked, right? But he neither probably will be palatable with the voters on either side. As in, I think reforms is a long journey. You would never be able to deliver all the reform. It's a political impossibility. Also, the system would have a very big shock, right? So it's a long journey. Started in the 80s. We had a bigger step in the 90s. Chidambaram himself, when he was finance minister in 97, he had another set of reforms. The VDIS scheme. You had like next set of reforms in Vajpayee government, etc. Right? So it's been a long process, and we still have a long go to go. So this is a slow cooked dish, if any. So moving on, uh, Prime Minister Modi met Vladimir Putin earlier this week at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit in Uzbekistan, where he raised concerns on like food, fertilizer, and fuel security, and also he mentioned this is not an era of war. So kind of highlighting India's like pro-peace stance while not taking any stance on any side, and also requested, if possible, like to end the war as soon as possible. During the summit, PM Modi also had conversation with Ibrahim Raisi of Iran, where he discussed resuming oil imports from Iran as well as connectivity links to the Chahabahar port. So, what do you think about this, Abhishek? Like in this meeting at the SCO?
Yeah, so SCO is like one of those international organizations India is a part of, which we kind of flies under the radar, right? We don't really talk about it nearly as much as we talk about the Quad or the recent I2U2, etc. So yeah, it was like um, actually quite a big event that leaders of 8 countries, including India, China, Russia, and Pakistan, were all together in one forum. And this exchange that PM Modi had with Vladimir Putin on the stage has become quite globally, relevant, and has been sort of played across all the media, right? Especially the Western media. So before I come to the Western media reaction, just to recap the major points that were sort of talked about on the stage. Firstly, Prime Minister Modi thanked both Russia and Ukraine for ensuring that Indian students were able to sort of come out of the conflict zone safely. So he made it a point to acknowledge both Russia and Ukraine for that. And then he basically, as you said that this is not the era for war, and essentially making a case for peace. And he basically said that, look, uh, due to this conflict, uh, the world at large is facing a crisis in terms of food security, fuel security, and fertilizers, right? And we know that Ukraine is a key, and of course Russia are both are key players in all these three areas, right? And so using that, he basically said that, look, Russia has to be at the forefront of coming up with solutions for these three areas, right? In terms of avoiding a global crisis, to which and so with that, he said that he hopes that both the countries can come to a peaceful end to this conflict soon. To which Vladimir Putin basically said that, look, he acknowledges the concerns that India has, and he is sort of working on it. He, of course, blamed Ukraine, saying that the other side is not interested in peace right now. Uh, this is also in the backdrop of the exchange between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin the previous day, where some sort of similar sentiments were expressed, and Putin had to acknowledge that even China has concerns with what is going on right now in Ukraine. So this was broadly the sentiment there, and as I was looking at CNN on YouTube, and CNN played out this entire exchange between Modi and Putin in a very, for a change, a very positive sort of thing that Prime Minister Modi has done. Right? It's almost like they spun it like this is how India is now completely showing to the world that they are not on Russia's side, and like this is a big win for the Western side of the equation, is how they spun it, right? And the general comments were like, India or Modi can do 100 good things, but it is only on when they went against Russia, even for like in the smallest sense, that is finally when CNN found something positive to say about India, right? So that was quite amusing. I think India is also slowly, I don't know if they have changed tack, but it's now coming to the fore that on various United Nations votes, India has sort of taken the opposite side. For example, the more publicized one was whether to allow the Ukrainian leader to speak at UN, right? And India voted in favor of that, which is again something which uh, given the commentary that you would have seen in the past few months, it would seem that India is always backing Russia. But I think the fair way to put it is India has been taking stand on a case-to-case basis, depending on the topic, right, and not blindly going with either the US or Russia, right? So, yeah, I think that was an interesting set of events in the last week. Also, as you said, India talked about connectivity in general, right? And how all the 8 countries in this region, in this block, let's say the Shanghai Cooperation SCO, should be able to have a free transit of goods between them, right? And this is relevant in the sense, for example, that Pakistan has been blocking India's transport of wheat to Afghanistan, right? So those kind of things were also uh, brought up. But yeah, I think quite a significant event overall, in the sense, uh, Putin, Modi, and Xi were all together at one forum, right?
So moving on, The iconic tennis legend Roger Federer announced retirement after this week's Lever Cup, which he's playing for Switzerland. So the Swiss great announced his retirement, quoting reasons from injuries to the surgeries that he sustained over 3 years. And he's won, like we all know, he's won 20 Grand Slams, over 1,500 ATP singles titles, 223 doubles, and like he has revealed that he's not retired, like he's not retired hurt in a single match in his career. So kudos to his fitness. And it's like a lot of his contemporaries have showered him with praises. So it is definitely like kind of an end of an era, right? Uh, Abhishek, you're on mute or frozen.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, definitely, this is like the second big retirement back to back in tennis, right? With Serena Williams, arguably the greatest women's tennis player, and Roger Federer, again, arguably the greatest men's tennis player, right? Um, so yeah, I think this is like almost 2 decades of Federer that tennis fans have watched. He came on the ATP scene, I think, in 1999. By 2001, he had his breakout moment, I think, when he defeated Pete Sampras in the Wimbledon quarterfinals, and then a couple of years later, he won his first Grand Slam at Wimbledon, right, in 2003. And since then, it's been an incredible era of men's tennis. Initially, it was Federer dominating on his own, and then very soon, within a few years, Nadal came up to the scene, and then again, after a few years, couple of years, it was three of them, right? With Djokovic also joining in at the top of the men's game, right? And so between the three of them, like over 60 Grand Slams won. This is like unparalleled in the history of tennis, right? Never has the game seen such dominance from a select group of players, right? I mean, if you believe the English, the British media, even it was a period of Fab Four with Andy Murray also joining in, but clearly he was not quite in that same league of greatness. But yeah, I think with Federer, the great part about him was his the elegant way in which he played the game, right? One of the very few tennis players who still used the single-handed backhand, as you can see in the picture here, right? In the modern game. The modern game is all about power and precision, which I think 90-95% of the players choose the double handed backhand, but that is not nearly as beautiful to watch, right? As so Federer, I think, made the game look really beautiful. He probably was, I would say, the number one draw in terms of popular appeal, right? To get more and more people to tune in, whether in on to watch on television or in stadiums, right? And that matters a huge deal. So I was just reading somewhere that when he first won his first Australian Open in the mid 2000s, the prize money was about $900,000, right? By the time he won his last, it had raised to 4 million, right? So I mean, his success on the court also translated into big commercial success of the field, or let's say it brought in a lot more viewership and money for the sport, which also really matters a lot. So yeah, I think Federer will definitely be missed by tennis fans. I think the era of the big three is also sort of coming to an end. I mean, I don't know how long Nadal and Djokovic will carry on. Let's hope they carry on a little bit longer. But I think we are at a point where there's a changing of uh, the era as well, right? With we had a new U.S. Open champion this time in Alcaraz, who is just 19 years old and already the youngest ever world number one. So possibly we have with him a number of stars ready to take over men's tennis into a new era. But I think Federer will be the most fondly remembered out of all the greats that we have in the current era.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always like it's a nice thing. It's like you mark like those time frames. Like you had like Sampras and Agassi. Earlier you had Becker and Edberg, right? And like all of those phases. And this one with three, which you had like Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and it spanned over a very long time as well.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's really an end of an era and start of a new dawn. So hopefully for all sports fans. Finally, PM Modi celebrated his birthday by releasing 8 cheetahs in the Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh. They were brought from Namibia, and it's the first time that cheetahs are coming back to the Indian wildlife habitat since they went extinct about 70 years ago. The project cheetah is like similar to other conservation projects of critically important species like tigers, lions, elephants, and this is quite a good initiative. According to like while it has been like politicized and there is a lot of depending on your ideology, there is a lot of criticism that why are like we importing cheetahs from Namibia. But this is like we had cheetahs in that region till like 1952, and this is started like since 2005 from the Center of Cellular and Molecular Biology to either clone an Asiatic cheetah or like in 2010 the Ministry of Environment put out a plan to get these from Africa, right? And this is also important for conservation because all these wildlife is like quite prone to extinction even by like a certain disease, etc. So by having them in a different location also is quite important. So in phase one right now just 8 cheetahs have been brought over, and the aim is to get 10 to 12 coming in, and they are being like tagged with a radio frequency collar, and they are going to be monitored over a period of time. I think visitors will not be allowed to the national park till like there is some sort of like a stabilization and the cheetahs get acclimatized to the new terrain. And I think this is quite a good thing. Like you look at like the southern African nations. So in South Africa, Namibia and South Africa, and like in Eastern Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, they've done quite a good job with wildlife tourism, right? India is also slowly getting there. Once there is enough money coming in, you can spend more and make a habitat which is better, not just for the wildlife, and also can allow the tourists, so Indians as well as like people from overseas want to come and visit, to actually glimpse these magnificent creatures, right? So hopefully this is an experiment. It will only time will say how the survival happens in this new ecology. But given that cheetahs were native to India, hopefully we don't see like a big sudden shock, and it manages the ecosystem and the balance in the ecology well, instead of being like a prime predator and like wiping out other species. And let's see, hopefully, so this adds another wildlife park on my bucket list to see the Indian cheetahs in Kuno National Park. Anything to add, Abhishek?
Yeah, I think while the cheetahs look quite similar to the other similar wildcat we have, that is the leopards, I think it's important to understand that they are pretty different animals, at least in terms of the habitat they thrive in, right? So I think cheetahs are more like animals for the open grass banks or land banks, right? While the leopard is sort of more able to manage in, let's say, through much more dense forest, right? Because I think they are tree climbers and all that. So yeah, I think it's in. So I'm sure all this was taken into consideration when this particular national park was chosen, right? It would be like the most similar one to what they would be experiencing back in Namibia, right? From where they have been brought in. So yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how this project progresses, whether there is an increase in numbers, and ultimately, it's, as it was also explained, it's about bringing an ecological balance with the introduction of a top predator in an ecosystem. So yeah, interesting times, and yeah, probably uh, worth a future trip, right, to Madhya Pradesh to see them.
Absolutely. So that's it for the weekly. So in the coming episode, due to be released this week, it's India's underbelly, looking at the espionage in the subcontinent with Shaunak Agar Khedkar. He is the author of Let Bhutto Eat Grass. I think he's had three. So he's had two sequels after the first one. So part 1, 2, and 3. And he has a very interesting blog as well, espionage.substack.com. So it's definitely going to be very interesting. It is always interesting to know what goes on in the underbelly, and a lot of the spy movies, etc., what we see are much more in the Western context. So even like in an Indian context, that is a lot more interesting, given that India does have a little bit hostile neighbors, right, like Pakistan, so and China. So that is going to be interesting. So please tune in, and please either watch it on YouTube or follow it on your favorite podcast platforms. That's it today. Thank you from me and Abhishek. Thank you and Jai Hind.